The Galactic University was unlike any institution on Earth. It was a place where beings from all corners of the universe came to learn, share knowledge, and test their intellects. Here, humans were few, but Lieutenant Kate Reynolds was one of them. She had been accepted into the university as part of a human exchange program and had spent months preparing for the final exams. Today, the exam that would test her abilities was starting, and the tension in the air was thick. The exam hall was filled with students from countless species. Some had scales, others had fur, and some floated in the air, their bodies wrapped in shimmering energy. The room buzzed with the sound of their voices, each alien discussing strategies for the final test. In one corner, a group of Zorvans, tall, pale beings with telepathic abilities, whispered among themselves, their minds connected in a web of shared thought. Kate walked into the room, her military uniform a stark contrast to the brightly colored robes worn by the others. She felt the eyes of the other students on her as she passed. Most of them had already connected to their neural interfaces, glowing devices embedded in their heads. These interfaces allowed the users to access a vast database of knowledge and solve problems with lightning speed. It was the key to success in galactic exams. But Kate didn't use a neural interface. She had never liked them. Instead, she trusted in her own mind, her ability to think logically and creatively. She had trained her mind for years, relying on her instincts, and she wasn't about to change that now. As she took her seat at the front of the exam hall, she noticed the reactions of the other students. The Zorvans exchanged amused glances. The Arctrians, known for their data processing skills, sneered slightly. Even the Korvek, a species that communicated through a hive mind, looked at her with skepticism. They all knew that without the neural interface, Kate was at a significant disadvantage. The interface allowed the others to download knowledge directly into their brains, making it possible to solve questions in mere seconds. Kate smiled inwardly, but didn't let it show on her face. She could feel the weight of their judgment, but it didn't bother her. She knew something they didn't. Humans had always excelled at thinking outside the box, at finding solutions where others saw only problems. This exam would be no different. The proctor, a tall, ancient creature whose features resembled a mixture of several species, stepped forward and activated the exam. A holographic screen appeared in front of each student, displaying the first set of questions. The room fell silent as the students began to work. Kate didn't rush to connect her mind to the system. Instead, she focused on the screen, letting the questions sink in. Her human mind didn't need constant data streams to process information. She trusted her ability to solve problems through critical thinking and careful analysis. Meanwhile, the other students tapped their interfaces, the lights in their heads flickering as they synced with the system. They worked quickly, scanning through the problems and solutions. Kate could hear their minds whirring, the sound of their neural interfaces humming with the constant flow of information. Kate took a deep breath, cleared her mind, and began to write. As the exam continued, the other students couldn't help but notice Kate. They watched her as she sat calmly in her seat, the only one in the room without a neural interface. It was hard for them to believe that someone from Earth, a species known for being primitive compared to most of the galactic races, would take the exam without any advanced technology to help. The Zorvans, a species with the ability to communicate telepathically, were the first to whisper. Their tall, slender bodies shimmered with an almost glowing aura. With their mental abilities, they could process complex information quickly and effortlessly. Most of them had finished the first set of questions in mere moments, but they couldn't help but watch Kate with curiosity and amusement. "I don't understand," one Zorvan thought, its voice clear in the minds of the others. "Why isn't she connecting to the system? It's almost quaint." The others responded with amused chuckles in their minds. They couldn't understand how anyone could attempt such an important exam without the neural interface. The exam was designed to test speed, knowledge, and the ability to handle massive amounts of data at once. Without the interface, Kate would struggle to keep up. "It's almost like she doesn't realize the gravity of this," one Zorvan continued, the telepathic voice laced with condescension. "She's going to fail miserably. There's no way a human can keep up with us. We have access to all the data of the galaxy." Nearby, the Arctrians, known for their advanced data processing abilities, looked over at Kate as well. Their eyes, glowing with the soft light of their neural implants, blinked slowly as they observed her. Unlike the Zorvans, the Arctrians didn't communicate through telepathy. But their intelligence was just as sharp. Their minds worked at lightning speed, instantly breaking down every problem and solving it in seconds. One of the Arctrians smirked. "She's wasting time. She's not going to finish in time. And even if she does, her answers will be so far behind that they won't matter." Poor human. The Korvac, a collective species that communicated through a hive mind, observed the situation with cold indifference. Their minds, linked together in a single consciousness, processed information in ways no individual could comprehend. But even they couldn't help but see the obvious flaw in Kate's approach. It was like trying to run a race without shoes, while everyone else had high-tech gear. "The human will fail," one of the Korvac mused, speaking as one voice, all of them agreeing. "Her primitive brain cannot keep up with us." It's amusing. Kate could hear their thoughts, but she didn't react. She had learned not to be bothered by the alien species' opinions. Humans had been underestimated countless times throughout history. They were often seen as weak, primitive, and not capable of matching the intelligence of other galactic species. But history had shown that humans could do incredible things when pushed to their limits. Kate had no intention of proving them wrong with anger or frustration. She simply had to do her best and let the results speak for themselves. As the exam continued, the laughter and whispers faded into the background. Kate was focused, writing her answers with careful thought. The aliens might have underestimated her, but that was fine. She didn't need their approval. She just needed to finish the exam, and finish it in her own way. The clock in the corner of the room ticked down, signaling the start of the exam. A loud, soft chime echoed in the hall, and instantly, the screens in front of each student came to life, displaying a series of complex problems that stretched across the room. The questions flashed on the screens for a second before moving to the next, each one designed to test the student's ability to process massive amounts of information. For most students, this was just another exam they would breeze through with the help of their neural interfaces. The Zorvans were the first to react. They had already synced their minds with their neural interfaces the moment the exam began. Their eyes glowed, and their brains processed data at incredible speeds. One by one, the Zorvans solved the first set of questions. Their answers appeared on their screens instantly, faster than any human could dream of. Kate, however, didn't connect her mind to the system. She simply looked at the first question and began to think. She could feel the pressure of the others around her, but she focused only on the task ahead. Her hands moved to the pencil and paper on her desk, writing down the first question in clear, neat handwriting. The question was a logic puzzle, asking the students to calculate the most efficient way to move resources across a galaxy. Most of the alien students immediately accessed their interfaces to pull up data from across the known universe, and they began to analyze the puzzle using numbers and equations stored in their minds. But Kate didn't need to look up anything. She had learned problem-solving techniques the old-fashioned way, through practice and training. She wrote down the key parts of the problem and started mapping out a solution using her own reasoning. The Zorvans, watching her, couldn't understand what she was doing. Their minds, connected to the system, couldn't make sense of her slow, manual process. "She's wasting time," one of them thought. "Why isn't she connecting to the interface? It's ridiculous." But Kate didn't mind. She knew that the aliens were relying too much on their technology. The neural interfaces were useful, yes, but they didn't allow for creative thinking. They didn't challenge the brain in the way real problem-solving did. Humans, though, could think outside the box. That's what made them special. Kate trusted her instincts, her creativity, and her training. The questions continued to come faster, one after another, each one more complicated than the last. But Kate didn't rush. She took her time to think through each problem carefully. As the other students worked at lightning speed, trying to keep up with the data pouring into their minds, Kate remained calm. She wrote out her solutions one step at a time, confident in the knowledge that her approach was solid. She didn't need to rely on a machine to think for her. She could do it herself. In the distance, she could hear the Zorvan's mental chatter picking up speed. Their thoughts were racing, jumping from one idea to the next, analyzing data too quickly for most people to keep up with. The Arctrians, who were known for their speed with numbers, were also advancing rapidly, their screens flashing with completed answers. But Kate was still calm, her eyes fixed on her paper as she worked. Around her, the others were already moving on to the next set of questions, their minds focused on finding answers faster than anyone else. Kate, however, remained quiet, writing her thoughts down methodically. As she worked, she felt a sense of confidence growing inside her. She had always trusted her ability to think clearly and logically, and this exam would be no different. As the exam progressed, the alien students started to finish the first set of questions. Their neural interfaces flashed with success as they completed each task in a matter of seconds. It was clear they were racing through the problems at a speed that Kate couldn't match. Their minds, connected to the interface, processed data at an incredible pace, analyzing numbers, calculations, and patterns in the blink of an eye. The Zorvans, who had been the first to finish the first section, moved on to the next challenge. Their glowing eyes flickered as they quickly accessed more information. They communicated silently, through telepathy, and Kate could hear their thoughts as they passed by her. Too slow, one of them thought, looking at Kate. She'll never finish at this rate. Kate ignored them. She was used to the judgment, used to the whispers. Humans had always been seen as less advanced than the other species in the galaxy. But she knew her strengths. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to use a neural interface. Her mind was capable of great things if she trusted it. The Arctrians, another highly intelligent species, were also moving through the exam quickly. Their ability to process data and numbers made them incredibly fast. They worked in near silence, their eyes glowing as they accessed every piece of data stored in their minds. Kate watched one of them for a moment, noting how quickly they completed each section. She couldn't help but feel a little pressure, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't a race for speed. This was about quality. And she trusted her human brain to get the job done. The Korvac, who communicated as one unified mind, were a little slower than the Zorvans and Arctrians, but they still finished each question with precision. Their hive mind worked together, each individual focusing on a small part of the problem before merging their answers into one perfect solution. It was an efficient method, and Kate couldn't help but admire their teamwork. But again, it was a method that relied on technology and unity, not independent thought. All around her, the alien students were speeding through the exam, while Kate remained focused, her pen moving steadily across the paper. The questions continued to get more difficult, but Kate didn't feel the pressure that the others did. She had a way of slowing down her mind and making sense of the chaos around her. While the other students were driven by the need for speed, Kate was focused on solving the problems, one step at a time. Time seemed to pass quickly. The alien students were already well into the next section, but Kate had just completed the first part. It wasn't that she was slow. It was just that her method was different. While they had advantages in speed and technology, Kate knew her strength was in her ability to think clearly, to analyze each problem from a new angle. The more the alien students raced ahead, the more confident Kate became. They were relying too much on their interfaces, too much on technology. She trusted herself, her ability to think and solve problems in ways that no machine could replicate. And while the others sped forward, Kate was taking her time, working through each problem with care and precision. As the exam continued, Kate remained calm, even as the other students quickly advanced through the questions. The Zorvans, Arctrians, and Korvac were well into the second set of problems, their neural interfaces humming with activity. They moved through the tasks with ease, their glowing eyes flashing as they absorbed and processed information faster than anyone could comprehend. Kate, on the other hand, was still working on the first section, writing down her answers step by step. She could hear their mental whispers as they worked. The Zorvans, who were already on the second section, thought to themselves, "She's still on the first part. She's going to fail. There's no way she can catch up now." The Arctrians, too, seemed to think little of her progress. "She's too slow. Even if she finishes, it will be too late," one of them mused, their mind buzzing with the thrill of moving quickly through the exam. But Kate ignored them. She focused only on her paper, taking the time to solve each problem carefully, not worrying about how quickly the others were moving. She trusted her method. She had always done things her way. There was no need to rush. Time passed, and the alien students grew more and more confident. They had completed entire sections while Kate was still on the first part of the exam. Their minds were overwhelmed with data, but they didn't notice. They were so used to the speed the neural interface provided that they didn't realize the system was starting to glitch. The Zorvans were the first to notice something wasn't quite right. As they answered a complex question, the data they had accessed suddenly began to flicker, causing the equation to change mid-calculation. They tried to reconnect, but the problem only grew worse. Their glowing eyes blinked rapidly as they struggled to make sense of the new errors. "What's happening?" one Zorvan thought, its voice filled with panic. "The system, it's failing." The Arctrians, too, noticed the glitches. Their neural interfaces seemed to overload, slowing down their ability to process the questions. They tried to reset the system, but the problems only became more chaotic. Kate, however, remained unaffected. While the other students scrambled to fix their systems, she kept moving forward, solving the problems with the same calm and steady pace she had used since the beginning. She wasn't relying on a machine to think for her. She was solving the problems with her mind, her own reasoning, and that made all the difference. The glitches in the system grew worse for the other students. The Zorvans' telepathic communication became disjointed as their interface flickered, disrupting their ability to share thoughts clearly. The Arctrians' data processing ability slowed down as their interface scrambled the numbers. Even the Korvek, who worked as a hive mind, began to experience disruptions in their collective consciousness. Kate couldn't help but notice the growing chaos around her. The students who had been so confident at the start were now scrambling, trying to fix their systems, their eyes wide with frustration. Kate felt a small smile tug at her lips, but she didn't let it show. She knew that the true power of problem-solving came from within. It wasn't about how fast you could process data. It was about how well you could think through the challenges. As the other students panicked, Kate reached the final question of the first section. She wrote down the last answer, a sense of satisfaction filling her. She was ready to move on. But the others, they were still tangled in their mistakes, struggling to fix the glitches that had thrown them off track. Kate's heart raced, but not from panic. Instead, it was a thrill of calm satisfaction. As she wrote down the final answer to the last problem in the first section, she glanced up. All around her, the alien students were starting to lose their focus. The glitches in their neural interfaces had become more severe. Some of them were staring blankly at their screens, unsure of what was going wrong. The Zorvans, who had once been so confident, were now mentally scrambling. Their telepathic thoughts were fragmented, and they couldn't communicate clearly with one another. "What's happening?" one Zorvan asked, its voice full of uncertainty. "The data's corrupted. How can we finish this without it?" The Arctrians, usually so efficient, were also struggling. Their glowing eyes flickered as they tried to analyze the problems, but the system was malfunctioning, and the numbers they were receiving were wrong. "Reset the system," one of them demanded, but nothing happened. The glitch was deep, and it couldn't be fixed by just pushing a button. Meanwhile, the Korvac hive mind, always so unified, began to fragment. The normally synchronized thoughts of the collective were now disrupted, like a choir missing a note. They tried to merge their solutions, but the system wouldn't allow it. Each mind was disconnected, and their answers became confused and incomplete. Kate, however, didn't even need to look up to see what was happening. She had already completed the first section of the exam without a single problem. As the other students struggled, she moved calmly to the next section. No glitches, no panic. She trusted herself and her human mind to solve the problems the way it was meant to. The second section of the exam was far more difficult than the first, but Kate didn't hesitate. She knew this was where the true test would come, where she would need to apply everything she had learned. She didn't rush through it. Instead, she took her time, analyzing each problem and thinking critically about the best solutions. Her pencil moved smoothly across the paper as she worked, each answer carefully written and clearly thought out. The other students, still distracted by their malfunctioning interfaces, couldn't help but notice Kate's progress. The Zorvans had stopped trying to use their telepathy, the connection between their minds broken by the glitch. They were looking at Kate, and some of them even muttered aloud. "Cheese. Moving on," one of them said, disbelief in their voice. "She's already on the next section." The Arctrians, too, were watching. Their once confident minds now filled with confusion. They stared at Kate as she worked through the problems, still focused and calm. "How is she doing this?" one of them wondered aloud. "How is she not affected by the glitches?" Kate didn't respond. She simply focused on the exam, continuing to work at her own pace. For her, it wasn't about speed. It was about accuracy and solving the problems in a way no machine could. As she reached the halfway point of the second section, Kate realized something. The other students were still stuck on the first section, trying to fix their malfunctioning systems. They had lost valuable time. They had relied too much on technology, and now they were paying the price. Kate, however, was ahead, solving the problems without any need for an interface, relying on nothing but her own mind. She smiled to herself, knowing that sometimes the best advantage came from thinking for yourself. As Kate worked through the second section of the exam, she couldn't help but notice the growing chaos around her. The once confident alien students were now in complete disarray. Their neural interfaces were still malfunctioning, their screens flickering with distorted data. The Zorvans, usually so calm and collected, were now frantic, trying to fix the glitches by mentally reconnecting with their systems. But it wasn't working. "What's happening?" one of the Zorvans thought, panic creeping into its voice. "The system is completely failing. We can't finish like this." Beside them, the Arctrians, who had once been moving at lightning speed, now appeared lost. Their eyes no longer glowed with the usual sharp focus. Instead, they blinked in confusion, trying to reset their systems. But no matter how many times they tried, the glitches persisted. Their ability to process data had slowed dramatically, and their screens now displayed incomplete answers. Kate looked around at the other students, but she didn't let the distractions affect her. She stayed focused, carefully writing down her answers to the problems. The questions were difficult, but they didn't faze her. She worked through them slowly and methodically, using her own reasoning, not relying on the glitchy technology that surrounded her. The Korvac, who had once been able to solve problems as a unified collective, were now scattered in their thoughts. The hive mind was no longer in sync. They tried to re-establish their connection, but the system wasn't allowing it. The Korvac were used to working together, and now they found themselves isolated, each individual struggling to solve the questions on their own. Kate's confidence grew as she moved closer to the final section of the exam. She had already finished most of the second section, while the other students were still stuck, unable to fix their systems. Their attempts to reconnect were fruitless, and the pressure was beginning to show. The exam was nearing its end, and Kate could see the Zorvans, Arcturians, and Korvac growing more anxious. They were falling behind. Kate glanced at the timer in the corner of the room. The final countdown had begun. There were only 10 minutes left. She felt a surge of excitement. She wasn't just keeping up anymore. She was ahead. As the other students continued to struggle, Kate's steady progress made it clear that she had taken control of the exam. The Zorvans were now completely silent, their minds locked in frustration. One of them sent out a thought, a question filled with disbelief. How is she still going? How did she do this without an interface? The Arcturians were no better. They had stopped trying to fix the glitches altogether. Their data processing slowed to a crawl. Their eyes were dull, their minds distracted. Some of them even turned their screens off in frustration. The Korvac, still struggling to reconnect their minds, now seemed completely lost. The hive mind, once so powerful, had disbanded, and now each individual Korvac was working alone, their answers incomplete and scattered. Kate felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had never needed the interface. The glitches hadn't fazed her. While the aliens relied on their technology to think for them, Kate had trusted her human mind to solve the problems. She didn't need the system. She didn't need the distractions. She only needed herself. As the timer ticked down, Kate reached the final problem. It was a complex challenge, unlike anything she had faced so far, but she was ready. She focused entirely on the question, taking her time to work through the details. She knew this was the final hurdle. The other students were still struggling with the previous sections, unable to catch up. Kate was almost there. She just needed to finish strong. With only a few minutes left on the timer, Kate focused all her attention on the final problem. It was a massive challenge, designed to test the students' ability to think critically and creatively. The question involved a series of complex variables, requiring careful analysis and a deep understanding of the system. Kate's eyes scanned the screen in front of her. She had already solved most of the problem, but there was one tricky part left. The solution seemed elusive at first. As she stared at the screen, she realized something important. This was the moment where all the other students would fail. They were so reliant on their neural interfaces, but those were failing them now. Kate, however, had always trusted herself. She didn't need a machine to think for her. She knew how to solve problems with her own mind, no matter how complicated. Across the room, the other students were still struggling. The Zorvans were completely silent now, their glowing eyes dim. They had tried everything to fix their interfaces, but it was no use. The system was broken, and they had lost precious time trying to fix it. Their minds were too scattered, too disoriented, to focus on the task at hand. The Arcturians, once so confident, were now in full panic mode. They had stopped even trying to fix their systems, and were now simply staring blankly at their screens, unable to process anything. Their minds had slowed to a crawl, and the more they tried to focus, the more the data became garbled. They were lost in the confusion, trapped by the glitches they couldn't escape. The Korvac, too, were struggling. The once powerful hive mind had disbanded, and now each individual Korvac was working alone, their minds scattered. They had no way to communicate with each other anymore, and as a result, their answers were incomplete and disorganized. The problem they faced was too complex for them to solve alone, and it was clear that they weren't going to finish in time. Kate felt a sense of calm wash over her. The more she worked through the final problem, the more confident she became. The others had relied too heavily on technology, but Kate knew the real power lay in the human mind. She had learned how to solve problems without the need for an interface. She had always trusted her instincts, her ability to think clearly, and now it was paying off. Her pen moved quickly across the paper, writing down the final steps of her solution. As she completed the last calculation, she double-checked her work. Everything was perfect. She looked up at the timer. There was only 1 minute left. She had finished. Kate sat back in her chair and took a deep breath. She couldn't help but smile. She had done it. The others had struggled with their technology, but Kate had solved every problem by trusting herself. She hadn't been distracted by the glitches or the malfunctioning systems. She had completed the exam on her own terms. Across the room, the alien students were still in a state of panic. They hadn't finished, and time was running out. Kate watched them, knowing that they were too focused on the wrong things. They had relied on their neural interfaces to think for them, and now they were paying the price. Kate's heart beat a little faster as the final seconds ticked away. She had proven something today, not just to the aliens, but to herself. Humans didn't need to rely on technology to be great. She had shown them all that true intelligence came from within. The final seconds of the exam ticked away, and Kate leaned back in her chair, a quiet sense of accomplishment settling in her chest. She had finished, and she was confident that her answers were flawless. Across the room, the other students were still desperately trying to finish, their minds scrambled by glitches and system errors. They were so caught up in their technology that they couldn't even see the finish line. As the timer buzzed, signaling the end of the exam, Kate stood up, feeling a strange mix of calm and excitement. She walked up to the front of the room, where the instructor, a tall alien with pale blue skin, was standing. The instructor looked down at Kate and gave a slight nod of approval. "You've completed the exam in time," the instructor said, their voice echoing through the room. "You're the only one who has finished." Kate felt her heart race slightly. She had expected some recognition, but the calm way the instructor spoke made her feel like she was in another world. She nodded back, her eyes scanning the room. The other students were still seated, their heads bent over their papers and screens. The Zorvans, the Arctrians, and the Korvac were all still struggling. Some were rereading their answers, trying to make sense of their confusion, while others had simply given up. They had failed to finish the exam in time, and Kate had beaten them all without using a neural interface. The instructor began to walk around the room, observing the other students. Their eyes moved quickly from one student to the next, noting the frustration and panic that had taken over each one. Then the instructor stopped in front of Kate. "You did it," the instructor said with a nod of respect. "And you did it without using any technology. You relied only on your mind." Kate nodded quietly. "Yes," she said. "I trusted myself." The instructor paused for a moment, their expression unreadable. "I see now," they said thoughtfully. "Perhaps we underestimated humans. We believed you were limited, that you relied on tools and technology to survive. But you've proven today that your minds are your true strength." The other students, still in their state of panic, glanced up at Kate in disbelief. Some of them couldn't believe what they were hearing. They had relied on technology for so long that the thought of doing something without it seemed almost impossible. Kate felt a sense of pride, but she didn't boast. She simply looked back at the instructor, who gave a small smile. "You've shown us something valuable today, Kate," the instructor continued. "Your species is more capable than we thought. Perhaps in the future, we'll learn to value the strength of the human mind over our reliance on technology." The other students exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. They had always thought of humans as primitive, as a species that couldn't possibly compare to the advanced beings around them. But Kate had proven them wrong. She had completed the exam not by rushing or relying on neural interfaces, but by trusting her own intelligence, her own ability to think and solve problems. Kate smiled to herself as she walked back to her seat. The other students may have had their technology, but Kate knew that true intelligence came from within. The humans had shown their strength, and the aliens would have to learn to respect it. As Kate sat down, the instructor began collecting the incomplete exams from the other students. The room was silent now, the chaos of the exam over. Kate knew she had won not just the exam, but something far more important, the respect of everyone in the room.